There was a man named Theon who lived in a city where people gathered every night in loud halls, drinking, laughing, and convincing each other that life was fair as long as you were a good person. Theon used to sit on the edge of those gatherings, watching more than speaking. He noticed something that made him uneasy, something most people around him refused to acknowledge. Effort was not evenly rewarded, attention was not evenly distributed, and desire was never democratic. That realization didn't make him angry at first. It made him quiet. Because when you truly look at the world, not through ideology or comfort, but through outcomes, you start seeing patterns that are hard to unsee. One of those patterns is this: being average no longer works. Not morally, not emotionally, but structurally. The world changed, and most people didn't update their expectations with it. This isn't about hatred. It's not about blaming women. It's not even about judging men. It's about understanding incentives, selection, and reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. We live in a time where women have more choice than ever before, more visibility, more access, more information. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. And when choice expands, selection becomes stricter. That's how every system works, whether people like it or not. Now here's where most men emotionally shut down, because instead of understanding this, they personalize it. They turn a structural reality into a moral insult. They say it's unfair. They say standards are too high. They say something must be wrong with women. But that reaction completely misses the point. If you were in their position, with options, with attention, with abundance, you would also select. You would also compare. You would also optimize. Attraction doesn't operate on fairness. It operates on perceived value. And perceived value is built, not owed. The uncomfortable truth is that today there are many beautiful women, but far fewer disciplined, capable, and structured men. Not just in looks, but in direction, in stability, in self-control, in competence. And when supply and demand are misaligned, the market doesn't adjust emotionally. It adjusts ruthlessly. Being average used to be enough because competition was local and limited. You competed with people in your immediate environment. Today, comparison is global, visibility is constant, and average gets lost in the noise. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you invisible. Most men don't want to hear that because invisibility hurts more than rejection. Rejection means you were seen and declined. Invisibility means you weren't even considered. And instead of confronting that, many choose coping. They rationalize. They blame algorithms, society, feminism, luck, genetics, anything except the variables they can actually control. Here's the part that might surprise you. I understand women who choose only the top men, not because those men are morally superior, but because selection is about minimizing risk. Choosing someone without discipline, without structure, without momentum is a gamble. And most people don't gamble when they don't have to. This isn't cruelty. It's biology and psychology intersecting with modern conditions. The real issue is that many men were raised in comfort without being forged by responsibility. They were praised early, protected often, and never forced to develop discipline. They were told they had potential, and they believed that potential would somehow convert itself into outcomes without pressure. But potential means nothing without execution. You can see this clearly when someone from a comfortable background collapses the moment life stops accommodating them. They had support, resources, and time, yet no structure. And when reality arrives, they don't adapt. They cope. They complain. They numb themselves. Meanwhile, someone else, often with less privilege, less security, but more discipline, quietly builds. They don't talk about unfairness. They don't demand outcomes. They work with what is. And over time, they surpass those who were once ahead. This is why being average no longer works. Average today often means undisciplined, unfocused, reactive, and entitled to results without transformation. And here's the hardest part to accept. No one is coming to correct this for you. There will be no adjustment period where the world lowers its standards to accommodate your comfort. Nature doesn't negotiate. Markets don't care about intentions. Attraction doesn't reward effort that isn't visible. If you lack direction, someone with direction will replace you. If you lack discipline, someone disciplined will outpace you. If you lack structure, someone structured will feel safer, stronger, and more attractive by comparison. This doesn't mean you need to be perfect, but it does mean that having only one strength is no longer enough. Looks alone won't sustain attraction. Money alone won't create respect. Status alone won't build trust. The modern environment demands alignment, multiple pillars, consistency. This is where many men break emotionally, because they realize they're not being rejected for who they are, but for who they haven't become. And that realization hurts, because it removes the victim narrative. It puts responsibility back where it belongs. And responsibility is heavy. Most people would rather believe the game is rigged than accept that the game requires more than they're currently offering. Coping is easier than changing. Rationalization is easier than discipline. Complaining is easier than rebuilding. But avoiding reality doesn't soften it. It just delays the impact. Theon understood this early. He saw men around him growing bitter instead of better. He saw them explain away their stagnation instead of confronting it. And he realized something simple and brutal. Comfort creates weakness. Pressure creates structure. Being average no longer works because average no longer survives competition. Not socially, not romantically, not economically. This isn't a sentence. It's a starting point. Because once you accept this without resentment, something shifts. You stop arguing with reality. You stop demanding fairness. You stop waiting to be chosen. And that's where the real work begins. In the next part, we're going to talk about what most men do instead of changing. The coping mechanisms, the self-deception, the mental shortcuts that feel comforting but quietly destroy momentum. Because before you can build discipline, you have to see the lies that keep you average. Once men realize that being average no longer works, something interesting happens. Very few immediately change. Most don't. Instead, they cope. They build stories that protect their ego from reality. Because changing your life is painful, but changing the story is easy. Coping is subtle. It doesn't look like weakness at first. It looks like intelligence, like awareness, like being above the system. But in reality, it's often just avoidance with better vocabulary. You'll hear men say things like, "It's all genetics," or "Women only want the top 1%," or "The system is broken," or "Looks are everything, so why try?" These statements contain small pieces of truth, but they're used in the wrong way. Not to understand reality, but to escape responsibility. This is where the concept of copium comes in. Copium is what happens when the mind chooses comfort over correction. When someone would rather believe a story that keeps them still than accept a truth that demands effort. The most dangerous form of copium isn't anger, it's resignation. It's the quiet decision to stop trying while pretending it's a rational conclusion. This is especially common among men who were told early in life that they had potential. They grew up hearing that they were smart, special, or gifted, but they were never forced to build discipline. So when reality doesn't reward them later, they don't assume they need to change. They assume the world is wrong. There was a young man Theon once observed, born into a good family, well cared for, protected from struggle. He had time, resources, and support. People told him he was meant for more, but he never built structure. He never learned to delay gratification. He never developed consistency. And when life stopped accommodating him, he collapsed inward instead of adapting. He didn't fail loudly. He failed quietly. He became bitter, sarcastic, detached. He talked a lot about how unfair things were. He spent hours analyzing why success was rigged against him. And over time, he became very good at explaining his stagnation. That's one path. The other path looked very different. There was another man, less privileged, less protected, not exceptional in talent or background. He wasn't the best looking, and he didn't come from status. But he had one thing the other didn't: discipline. He showed up when it was boring. He worked when there was no feedback. He built habits before he built confidence. He didn't talk about potential. He didn't argue about fairness. He didn't consume endless content about self-improvement. He practiced it, slowly, quietly, repeatedly. Years later, the first man was still explaining why things shouldn't be the way they are. The second was living inside the results. Here's where coping becomes dangerous. Men who cope often start hiding behind labels. They'll identify themselves as sub-3, or doomed, or unlucky, as if naming the problem absolves them of responsibility. But labeling yourself doesn't change your position. It just makes the cage more comfortable. Looks matter. Status matters. Income matters. That's reality. But using that reality as a reason to stop is not wisdom. It's surrender. There's a difference between understanding constraints and submitting to them. Strong men work within constraints. Weak men use them as excuses. Another form of copium is fantasy, imagining success without process, imagining respect without competence, imagining attraction without alignment. Many men live more vividly in hypothetical futures than in their actual present actions. They'll say, "If I had this, then I would do that. If I were taller, I'd be confident. If I had money, I'd be disciplined. If women were different, I'd succeed." But notice how responsibility is always postponed, always conditional, always outside the self. The truth is uncomfortable. Discipline usually comes before confidence. Structure comes before freedom. Respect comes after competence, not before it. Coping also shows up socially. You can often tell who's coping by how they react to your progress. When you improve, they don't celebrate. They minimize. They change the topic. They point out the one small flaw you still have. Not because they hate you openly, but because your progress threatens the story they're telling themselves. If you do better, their excuses weaken, and that creates internal conflict they don't want to face. So instead of confronting their own stagnation, they quietly resent your discipline. This is why growth often comes with social distance. Not because you think you're better, but because your actions disrupt the equilibrium of coping around you. You become a mirror, and not everyone wants to see themselves clearly. The hardest truth for most men is this: no one is coming to save you from your own avoidance. There is no perfect explanation that will suddenly make effort unnecessary. There is no argument that replaces repetition. Coping feels intelligent. Discipline feels stupid, boring, unrewarded at first. But only one of them compounds. The men who escape average don't do it by winning debates online. They don't do it by consuming endless content. They don't do it by identifying with failure. They do it by choosing discomfort consistently. They stop smoking copium and start tolerating reality. In the next part, we're going to talk about the 3 pillars that actually matter in the modern world. Not fantasies, not ideology, not excuses. The real variables, the ones you can build, the ones that determine whether you stay invisible or become undeniable. Once men move past coping, they usually ask the same question. If being average no longer works, then what does? Not hypothetically, not motivationally, practically. What actually matters? The answer isn't complicated, but it's uncomfortable. In the modern world, 3 things dominate outcomes for men. Not opinions, not intentions, not how good of a person you believe you are. The pillars are simple: how you look, where you stand, and what you produce. Looks, status, income. Not because society is shallow, but because humans are perceptual creatures living in competitive systems. We respond to signals. We always have. Let's start with looks, because that's where most men either obsess or completely give up. Looks are not about perfection. They're about order, grooming, fitness, posture, presence, being physically capable enough that your body doesn't signal neglect. Most men underestimate how much discipline shows through the body long before they open their mouth. You don't need model genetics to stand out. You need consistency. A body that looks trained communicates self-respect. A face that looks rested communicates control. Appearance isn't vanity. It's the first signal of competence. And in a world of endless options, first signals matter. The mistake many men make is thinking that looks alone will carry them. They might get attention, but attention isn't retention. Attraction opens the door. It doesn't build the house. That's where status comes in. Status isn't popularity. It's not followers. It's not loud confidence. Status is your position relative to other men. It's whether people defer to you, whether your absence is noticed, whether your opinion carries weight without explanation. Status is built through reliability, competence, and direction. Men with status don't talk much about what they're going to do. They're already doing it. Others adjust around them. Most men avoid building status because it requires exposure to judgment. You have to risk being seen failing before you're seen succeeding. And that's terrifying to people who are still protecting their ego. But here's the truth. If you don't build status intentionally, you'll accept whatever status you're given. And that position is usually low. Then there's income, the most misunderstood pillar. Income isn't about luxury, it's about leverage, options, stability, freedom from desperation. Money doesn't make you interesting, but lack of it makes everything harder. It limits choices. It adds stress. It reduces patience. And stress leaks into every interaction, whether you admit it or not. Men who struggle financially often don't realize how much that instability shapes their behavior. They become reactive, short-term, easily frustrated, and attraction rarely grows in unstable environments. Here's the part most people don't want to hear. You don't need to be exceptional in all three pillars, but you can't afford to be weak in one. You can carry two and compensate for one, but if one collapses completely, someone else will outcompete you. That's the reality of abundance. There will always be someone who has what you lack. And if you're missing a pillar, you're betting that no one more complete shows up. That bet doesn't pay off often. This is why some men can attract women but can't keep them. Initial attraction came from looks. Retention failed because of instability, or directionlessness, or lack of momentum. Over time, gaps get exposed. And this is where many men misinterpret rejection. They think it's sudden, emotional, random. But usually, it's structural. A slow realization that alignment isn't there. Theon once observed that men who focused on only one pillar often blamed fate when things fell apart. They never asked which pillar they neglected. They never audited their own structure. They just felt betrayed. But nothing was taken from them. They simply didn't build enough. This isn't about becoming obsessed. It's about becoming complete, balanced, reliable. The modern world doesn't reward potential. It rewards integration. Can you take care of yourself? Can you move forward consistently? Can you handle pressure without collapsing? Can you improve without needing applause? Most men don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they try to skip the boring parts. They want outcomes without systems, respect without repetition, desire without discipline. But systems are what separate the visible from the invisible. Once you accept these pillars without resentment, something shifts psychologically. You stop arguing with reality. You stop negotiating with effort. You stop waiting for permission. You realize that no one owes you attraction. No one owes you admiration. But you owe yourself competence. And that realization is freeing, because it gives you a clear target. Not to impress others, but to remove your own weaknesses. Not to dominate, but to stabilize. Not to perform, but to build. In the next part, we're going to talk about the final transition. What happens when you stop chasing validation and start walking alone? The social cost, the silence, the distance, and why that isolation is not a punishment, but a necessary phase of becoming something most people never do. At some point, after you've accepted reality, stopped coping, and started building, something else happens that most men aren't prepared for. You begin to walk alone. Not dramatically, not proudly, just quietly. And that's where many people mistake the process. They think solitude is a punishment. They think distance means failure. They think silence means you've lost something. But in reality, this phase is a filter. When you stop chasing validation, your social circle changes. When you stop performing, fewer people stay. When you stop explaining yourself, misunderstandings increase. And when you stop being average, you no longer fit into spaces built to protect comfort. This is where men often panic. They notice fewer invitations, fewer messages, fewer shallow interactions, and they wonder if they made a mistake. They didn't. What's happening is simple. You are no longer reinforcing the equilibrium that kept everyone comfortable. Your discipline exposes stagnation. Your structure highlights chaos. Your progress quietly reminds others of the effort they're avoiding. And not everyone can tolerate that. You start noticing certain patterns. Some people never celebrate your wins. They downplay them. They shift the focus. They point out the one thing you didn't do perfectly. Not because they want you to fail openly, but because your success creates pressure they don't want to carry. This is one of the most painful social realizations. Not everyone who smiles with you wants you to grow. Some people need you to stay where you are, so they don't have to confront where they aren't. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So you pull back, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You stop sharing plans. You stop explaining progress. You stop seeking understanding from people who benefit from misunderstanding you. That's when the loneliness sets in. Real loneliness. Not the kind filled with noise and distractions, but the quiet kind. The kind where you sit with yourself without an audience, without reassurance, without applause. Most men avoid this stage. They rush back into chaos just to feel included again. They lower standards. They compromise momentum. They trade growth for comfort. You don't. You stay. You learn to sit with the silence without filling it. You learn to enjoy the absence of unnecessary voices. You learn to hear your own thoughts clearly again. And something important happens in that silence. Your decisions become sharper. Your emotions become more regulated. Your identity stops depending on feedback. You realize you don't actually need to be understood by most people. You need to be aligned with yourself. Theon once walked through a city where many men gathered in groups, laughing loudly, convincing each other they were content. He noticed that none of them were truly building anything. They were passing time together, not moving forward together. And he understood then that companionship without direction eventually becomes stagnation. Walking alone isn't about rejecting people. It's about refusing to betray your trajectory. This is the phase where your standards solidify. You become selective with time, energy, and attention. You no longer chase connection. You allow alignment. And if it doesn't appear, you keep moving anyway. This is also where resentment must be avoided. It's easy to look at the world and feel bitter, to feel like the system is harsh, to feel like effort isn't rewarded fast enough. But bitterness poisons discipline. It turns clarity into ego. You don't need that. You understand now that the path you're on was never meant to be crowded. If it were, the outcomes wouldn't be rare. The loneliness isn't evidence that you're wrong. It's evidence that you've stepped outside the average. And average was never the destination. Over time, the solitude stops feeling empty. It starts feeling clean, peaceful, focused. You become comfortable moving forward without witnesses, without reassurance, without guarantees. And eventually, something subtle happens. People who operate at a similar level begin to notice you. Not because you advertised yourself, but because alignment recognizes alignment. Fewer connections, better ones. You don't rush this. You don't force it. You let it emerge naturally, built on shared discipline rather than shared coping. Being average no longer works because the world doesn't reward comfort anymore. But it does reward structure. It rewards consistency. It rewards men who can stand alone without collapsing. This path isn't glamorous. It won't make you popular. It won't give you instant results. But it will give you something far more valuable. Stability, clarity, self-respect. And those are the foundations everything else is built on. You don't need to win the game quickly. You need to stay in it long enough to become undeniable. And that requires one final acceptance. Not everyone will come with you. That's not a tragedy. That's the price. That's the price. That's the price. That's the price.